What is up, everybody? I'm Simeon Zoom, and we are here to discuss why firebending is the weakest of the four elements in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Again, at this point, this one conversation has become 20% of the content on my page, or any of my pages for that matter. And recently it's come back up because I did a short, literally like a minute and a half max, of me going over the top 3 strongest firebending feats in Avatar: The Last Airbender and Korra. And I started the video out by saying, if you ask me which of the 4 elements is the weakest, I'm gonna say firebending. And within those 10 seconds, a multitude of people across multiple platforms took to the comments to tell me how wrong I am. So this video is entirely unscripted, and it's just going to be me responding to comments. Not that I'm offended in any way. I do think it's a little funny how angry certain people were hearing my take, and how their first response was to insult me and tell me that I've never seen the show. But at the same time, I do appreciate the engagement, and the entire point of my content is to stir up conversation about whatever nerd topic I feel like posting about that day. I went back to the first video I ever posted on this subject and pulled comments that I think responding to will help me facilitate a better illustration of my point. Of course, I recognize that all 4 of the elements of Avatar: The Last Airbender are pretty much equal, if not entirely equal, because they're literally designed to balance each other out. But this entire conversation came up some years ago because there was a prompt going around on Twitter and Instagram and all that asking which element people thought was the weakest, right? And I figured I would weigh in. The way I like to say it is that if earthbending got a 10, firebending would be a 9.5. I personally think earthbending is the strongest element, but we can get into more detail on that another time. I've found that a lot of arguments for why I'm wrong about firebending being the weakest element can fall into one of 5 categories. The first of which being So this comment in particular is in response to my take on Tony Stadovici's take that airbending is the weakest element because the Air Nation was entirely eradicated. It reads, they got their benders back, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they were the first to perish, and counting Aang with the Air Nation when he's literally the Avatar just shows you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So first off, I don't think the Fire Nation's conquest of the air nomads has anything to do with the comparative stance of firebending among the 4 elements. They defeated the air nomads because of Sozin's comet, the element of surprise, and the general pacifistic nature of the air nomads. And as far as counting Aang among the airbenders, even though he's the Avatar, of course I'm gonna count Aang. For the entirety of the first series, he's the only airbender in the show, outside of Flying Bison and some flashbacks. And of course there's an argument to be made that Aang won so many of his fights because nobody has had any experience with airbending for the last 100 years. So imagine getting in a fight and somebody's doing some stuff that you've just never seen or even thought of before. Of course it's gonna catch you off guard a little bit, and you're going to be more likely to lose. But there's no reason not to count Aang when we're talking about the Air Nation, because you can definitely just not give him the Avatar state. Honestly, I would have to say water, because how did they lose to the Fire Nation during a full moon, which is supposed to be when they're at their strongest? When exactly did they lose to the Fire Nation under a full moon? When the Fire Nation invaded the North Pole under a full moon, the army retreated and said, hey, we should probably wait until the sun comes back up. And instead, Admiral Zhao covertly made his way into the Spirit Oasis and killed the Moon Spirit. There was no real confrontation between an army of firebenders and an army of waterbenders under the full moon. And there's a reason for that, because the firebenders would have lost outright. That's why they didn't even try it. And before people say, oh, what about bloodbending? There are only 5 bloodbenders in the history of ATLA and Korra, so they are a non-factor. So here's my stance on the whole bloodbending thing. We'll get into more detail on this later, but the only bloodbenders you could really point to and say, hey, other waterbenders aren't able to do this kind of stuff are Yakone, Amon, and Tarlok, because Yakone has an innate ability to bloodbend outside of the full moon, which he passed down to his 2 sons genetically. Any other master waterbender should 100% be capable of bloodbending under a full moon, and there's nothing that says otherwise anywhere. If you know of something that says that a master waterbender who knows how to manipulate the water within plants and such wouldn't be able to do bloodbending for XYZ reason, drop a link in the comments or DM me on Instagram, and next time I talk about this topic, we can get into that. This one says, what? Firebenders can shoot lightning and combustion bending. They literally took over 80% of the world. Besides using Sozin's Comet, only 2 airbenders could use spiritual projection, and one of them is the Avatar, which is useless in combat. You're definitely underestimating firebending. Now, a lot of these comments come from a series of shorts that I did on TikTok and Instagram. So I had this whole argument that I had to chop up into 1-minute segments. And one of those segments was talking about the viability of the subtypes of each bending element. That's why he's bringing up firebending and combustion bending. But the whole thing about taking over 80% of the world without Sozin's Comet, again, has nothing to do with the fact that they're firebenders. For example, the Southern Water Tribe has never been a military juggernaut by any means, and the Fire Nation spent many years kidnapping people. They were taking the waterbenders, and the Southern Water Tribe wasn't losing because, oh, their firebending is so strong, our waterbending can't do anything against it. It's literally because the Fire Nation was riding around in massive metal icebreakers, and the Southern Water Tribe had canoes and bone weapons. That's actually one of the main perks that the Fire Nation has over any of the other nations. They were the first group to have an industrial revolution because the ability to control fire allowed them to refine metals and create those big metal icebreakers along with metal armor and stuff like that, which again, the Southern Water Tribe has no access to at all. The Firebenders ruled for 100 years. This take is stupid. No, they didn't. Bro, forget who attacked. This is satire, right? So the Fire Nation was the only nation that made it their prerogative to attack anyone else and try and take their land. I am 100% sure that if the Earth Nation wanted to take over the entire world, they could do it. If the Water Tribes wanted to take over the entire world, they could do it. The Fire Nation is just the only group who actually wanted to do that, and so they did it. And you have to remember that the entirety of the air nomads was taken out pretty much at the same time. In the next 100 years were spent trying to conquer the rest of the world, and they couldn't do it. The Water Tribes were not taken. Again, all of the water benders were taken out of the Southern Water Tribe, but it's not like they eradicated everyone down there. The Northern Water Tribe is largely untouched except for the Siege of the North, and admittedly they would have been taken out if it weren't for the Avatar. But again, nothing to do with the fact that the Firebenders are Firebenders, and everything to do with an overall ingenuity that the firebending forces show. And it's also not like the Fire Nation took the entire Earth Kingdom. They took key cities like Ba Sing Se and Omashu, but that's not the same as ruling the entire kingdom. If some other country sent their military to come set up shop in Washington, D.C., that doesn't mean they rule America. It means they took our capital. And we're not playing Civ 6. In real life, if you take a nation's capital, they set up another capital somewhere else. And then we have, my nigga, they took over the world. Again, no, they did not. They spent 100 years trying to, but that worldwide Fire Nation that Sozin was trying to achieve never actually happened. Okay, so some of these comments are kind of long, just a fair warning. Incorrect. Combat ability is top notch even among lower ranked benders. It is the most damaging element because it's literally just fire and can create the most damage the fastest. I would even argue with firebending being able to create the most damage the fastest. I'm giving that title to earthbending because for me to destroy something with firebending, the thing I'm attacking has to have a weak enough structure to be blown up. And granted, most things in the world can be blown up. And in Avatar, we see firebenders blowing up stones with their fire. But I feel like an earthbender could knock a building down way faster than a firebender by destroying its foundation, as opposed to setting it on fire or blowing up some load-bearing wall or something. One thing that I should have mentioned at the beginning of this video is that I'm not just looking at the combat ability here. In my original series and the video that you can currently find on my channel, I broke each element down to combat ability, versatility, utility, and the quality of their subtypes. And overall, in terms of destructive capability, firebending is definitely number 2. It's definitely not the weakest, but I think the reason that people focus so hard on the destructive capability of firebending is, just like this guy said, it's literally just fire. What do you do with fire? You burn shit, you blow things up, you zap people with lightning, and that's just about it. He goes on to say utility is obvious since you can cook food, create fire from your bare hands, and keep yourself warm. My counter to this is that human beings have been creating fire since we were barely human beings. I've never actually created fire out in the bush myself, but I've seen it done so many times that I'm 100% sure that eventually I'd be able to get one started. So to say that firebending should get any points because you can boil water or create a campfire without actually having to do the work, I think is a little bit silly given that anyone else, even non-benders, can do the exact same thing. And do you know what priority 1 of wilderness survival actually is? Because it's not fire, it's shelter, then water, then fire. Versatility is lacking but still has some merit. You can fly, attack, defend, and keep yourself alive in harsh scenarios. The only person we see fly in Avatar: The Last Airbender and Korra is General Iroh at the end of season 1 of Korra, where he flies fast enough to keep up with what are essentially 20th century biplanes, which is pretty impressive. But Azula, Ozai, and Zhang all only fly under Sozin's Comet, and we just can't factor Sozin's Comet into this kind of conversation at all. It's the biggest power-up in the entire show, and it only happens once every 100 years. And even then, it's not like we see mediocre firebenders zipping around under Sozin's Comet. Zhang, Ozai, and Azula are all firebending masters. 3 out of 5 are the strongest firebenders in the entire canon, the other 2 being Iroh and Zuko. Keeping yourself alive in harsh scenarios, I gotta tell you, there's not much that firebending can actually help you with. Unless you're in an area where creating fire is largely impossible, like if you're in the middle of the rainforest or something like that. But for example, let's look at the foggy swamp benders. As the name entails, they live in a big ass swamp and they still manage to create fire. And even if they couldn't create fire, they're water benders, which means they can largely separate the water around them from its impurities, and they can use plant bending. As for subtypes, they are the most useful / destructive we've seen in the history of the show. Lightning is quite literally powering the city in Legend of Korra, and combustion has only been stopped by the top benders in the show. So lightning is powering the city in the Legend of Korra? Yes, but does that have anything to do with the power ranking of firebending as one of the 4 elements? I wouldn't say so, because this is headcanon, but I'll bet you money that a non-bender designed those machines. And even then, I think it's a little irrelevant to point out the way that a world with benders tailors its technology to make use of those benders, or earthbenders having anything to do with the construction of Republic City as a whole. For instance, the streets aren't made of asphalt, it's just rock. And as far as combustion bending only being stopped by the top benders of the show, the 3 people we see defeat combustion benders on screen are Sokka, Bolin, and I think Su Yin Beifong. I don't think you can argue that any of these 3 are the top benders in the show. And don't get me wrong, I'm not sleeping on combustion bending. Blow things up with your mind is a crazy power, but make things explode, burn stuff, and shock it with lightning isn't getting firebending the amount of points that people think it should, at least for me, especially when the other 3 elements can do most of the exact same stuff. At max potential, I'd argue that air is the weakest. I saw your other videos and you claim that lightning is reactable. This is not true in the Avatar universe. They react to the telegraphed movements used to shoot lightning. Yeah. Telegraphed movements. Totally. Okay, that's cool and all, but I think that only makes reacting to that lightning easier, because then I'm really aim dodging, right? All I have to do is be faster than the tip of your finger. Ozai may have been the greatest firebender, but he still didn't show the max potential of the element, never did the dragon dance or master the other elements' bending styles. A firebender that solely bends lightning and constantly flies with fire would be very difficult for any bender to face and react to. That's true. We never see that. So again, irrelevant. One thing a lot of people do is bring up stuff that we just don't see, things that just don't happen in the show, like a hypothetical firebender who's flying and shooting lightning the whole time. And again, a lot of these comments are under videos that are only a minute long, so I didn't really do any elaborating at all. But this guy says he saw my other video, so I'm assuming he got the entire argument. So this person knows that I'm not just going off the destructive ability of any given element. Combat ability, versatility, utility, and subtype quality. Additionally, only another firebender can redirect lightning. So this is something that was brought up multiple times by multiple people. Learning the technique of lightning redirection doesn't give you increased reaction speed. I don't know where people are getting that from. I've never seen any author statements that say, yeah, once you learn lightning redirection, you now have a higher level of perception that people who don't know the technique don't have access to. That's just not a thing. They can also siphon heat, as Sozin has shown, create suffocating gas, as Roku has fell victim to, and they can break through most of the other elements' defenses under specific circumstances. I don't think they beat water, but they can beat earth and air at times. So yeah, they can siphon heat from fires, which I don't see any real use for outside of being a firefighter, which is cool, be a firefighter. But again, all 4 of the other elements can be used to fight fires just as easily. Creating suffocating gas, that's not a thing we've ever seen any firebenders do. If anything, that would be an airbending technique, but again, that's not something we see airbenders do either. He's just talking about stuff that we've never seen. And breaking through the defenses of other elements is true. This is very true. Like I said a little bit earlier, we've seen firebenders straight up blow up earth shields through sheer force, but any of the other elements can also do the same to firebending, and firebending is inherently less of a defensive art. So on the off chance that a firebender is actually going to try and create some type of shield with their fire, an earth, air, or waterbender has just as much of a chance of breaking that shield as a firebender does when it comes to breaking one of their shields. Waterbenders can freeze a heart and use bloodbending. Airbenders can choke someone and prevent firebenders from even creating fire at all. Earth, I guess, is the weakest with only having metal and magma, right? This is largely valid. All of the 4 elements are meant to be balanced. And so the whole conversation of which element is weakest comes down to personal opinion and how you choose to break down and score what each element is good at. My problem with this comment is saying that Earth is the weakest because they only have metal and magma. Like, only metal and magma? Only metal and magma. Lightning isn't the only subtype fire has. Combustion is canonically one of the hardest to counter. As far as utility goes, lightning produces more power per second than any other element can, as seen in Legend of Korra. So yeah, combustion bending in terms of destructive ability is definitely up there in terms of the most powerful single abilities in all of Avatar canon, but there are a couple things about that, right? So remember earlier when I said that as a whole, waterbenders would have access to bloodbending because the only people who have an exclusive ability, that being psychic bloodbending outside of the full moon, are Yakone's bloodline. The reason we don't see your average bloodbending is because it's illegal and because Hama was the person who invented bloodbending. She taught Katara, who swore to never use it, not because it's just something that any master waterbender couldn't do. Combustion bending, on the other hand, requires you to be part of a specific cult, and at the end of the day, if I can flick you in the forehead hard enough, you can't use it anymore. And I'm saying this because I've already said a couple times that I'm not just going off the destructive ability of firebending. Yeah, blowing shit up with your mind is cool. Super powerful ability. Please tell me something you can do with that other than blow things up. I work in a restaurant. What use do I have for blowing shit up with my mind? If I'm stuck alone on some island somewhere, what use do I have for blowing things up with my mind? None. Zero. Lightning produces more power per second than any other element can. Again, that's a cool thing that has very limited applications in real life. I'm a human generator. I'll get paid $16 an hour to sit there and bend lightning into a machine. I don't think that's enough to put firebending subtypes over healing, blood bending, phase shifting, plant manipulation, astral projection, metal bending, or magma bending. Bloodbending and magma bending have the same problems as lightning and combustion, to where they're cool, flashy abilities that are super powerful in terms of combat, but what are you going to do with these bending subtypes other than hurt people? Flight combustion, lightning combustion again, thermal control for self and environment. If it, fire sure isn't weak for versatility. The people who can respond to lightning have redirection capabilities, not to mention you're out a whole element for 100+ years. I just don't think weakest is fair. Again, the only person we actually see flying outside of Sozin's Comet is General Iroh, and that in itself means that hypothetically, Firebenders should be able to fly with their bending, but that's not a thing that we see Firebenders consistently do. It's not even implied that any Master Firebender should be able to fly. Combustion and lightning, when we're talking about versatility, again, it's kill people by blowing them up or kill people by shocking them with lightning. I don't actually think that's very versatile in the slightest. Thermal control for self and environment, again, put a jacket on, start a fire the old-fashioned way. Sure, fire lets you do these things quicker and easier, but that's not enough for me to give it more points in versatility than something like airbending, which gives you aero telekinesis, increased terrestrial movement speed, astral projection, and the same ability to do harm that firebending has. And he says we're out a whole element for 100+ years. That's totally irrelevant because of what I said before. There was no all-out war between the Fire Nation and the Air Nomads, so bringing that up doesn't really mean anything. Bro's saying a whole lot of nothing. We've seen so many non-masters use their firebending to fly. Like who? And others literally breathe fire. I'm not sure what breathing fire has to do with anything. Not every earthbender can use the subtypes of earthbending, but most firebenders can learn to bend lightning as opposed to earthbenders who can't learn how to metal bend if they aren't born with the potential. This is true. Do I think that matters? No, because even if not every earthbender can use metal bending, the earthbenders who do have metal bending can do orders of magnitude more stuff than a firebender can by producing lightning. Plus, the destructive power of firebending is crazy. If a firebender got close enough to an earthbender, they should not be losing a 1v1. You guys already know what I'm gonna say about that, so we're gonna move on. So a lot of these responses have bled into other categories in this list, but this section is all about the stuff that's straight up not true, people talking about things we just don't see in the show. Not a lot of people can handle the burden that fire carries with it, making fire one of the more difficult elements to control for real. Master firebenders are deadly. Fuck is he talking about for real? So firebending being the hardest to control makes it more powerful than any of the other elements? I don't think that makes any sense. I think a bending element that is inherently easier to master is favorable to one that I could accidentally injure myself or somebody else with at any moment. This comment is literally giving, yeah, not a lot of people could handle the power of firebending, and that's why firebending is on top, princess. By default, the weakest are the bending styles that need something external. Fire and air can bend regardless of the situation. Water and earth need something external, with water being a slight exception for advanced waterbenders, but there is no exception for earth. No earth, no bending. So earth has to be the weakest / least versatile. This is bullshit. First off, there's no situation where you're gonna be away from any of the 4 elements. Of course, there are situations where you're gonna be away from fire, but firebenders produce their own element, as he said. But when it comes to earth, we are literally floating through space on a giant rock. There is never going to be a situation where you're away from the earth. For example, the Fire Nation had to create a prison out of metal before metal bending had been invented out in the middle of the ocean to keep earthbenders from being able to do their thing. But the kicker with that is a strong enough earthbender would still have access to earth in those situations. There's earth underneath all that water. And even then, right, because obviously as we see in the show, most earthbenders can't access a rock that's under half a mile of seawater, right? How many times have you, watching this video, found yourself in the middle of the ocean in your day-to-day life? Unless an earthbender chooses to go somewhere where they have no earth around them or they're taken prisoner and put in that place, they're always gonna have access to something to bend. And as far as waterbenders go, right, there have been multiple situations where we see Katara looking around and going, I don't have any water to bend. If I keep a bottle of water in my bag, that is legitimately all I need. We see Katara use such a small amount of water to slice through earth like a pressure cutter. We've also seen her bend her sweat. We see Hama extract water from the air And in the modern day, you are never more than 50 yards away from a water source. There are going to be pipes, drains. I, for one, live in the South, and if I walk for 10 minutes in any given direction, I'm going to run into a creek of some kind, or a retention pond, or a water fountain. And one thing I'm sure I'm going to see after I post this video is that only a few waterbenders have been shown to do such high-level things as to extract water from other places. And it's not like the majority of master waterbenders aren't performing such feats because they can't. It's because they don't need to or weren't taught to. If I'm living at the North Pole, of course I'm not going to have any need to pull water out of thin air or from plants. There are no plants around to pull water from, and the entire city is made of ice. You see what I'm getting at? It's waterbending because you need water. If all resources are available, Earth is the weakest as it loses the main advantage of terrain. This makes no sense. Yeah, now that I'm reading this again, it's just a combination of the point from the last comment and saying that Earth is the weakest if all resources are available because it loses the main advantage of terrain. That's just not true. Just not true. That's just not true. You have a very short-sighted view on firebending. Yes, it excels in a combat scenario to a certain degree, but fire is literally an essential part of civilization, and lightning generation even better. Y'all really need to fix your grammar. You're literally a walking battery. You could charge your devices, provide power to houses, which is very essential in cold areas. You are literally the best asset during harsh winters. Every element has its weaknesses and strengths. That's why there's no truly weak element. Bro, and firebending has been used to heal a lot of times in the series and in the books. First off, I don't know of a single time firebending has been used to heal. If one of you guys knows something about that, let me know in the comments, but that's not a thing. The ability to charge your devices is entirely headcanon. I want you to try and charge your phone with lightning and let me know how that goes for you. Providing power to houses, cool, yeah, you're a human battery, awesome. Living in the real world, you don't need to be your own battery. You pay a light bill. I'm sure that's a thing in the Avatar universe as well. Fire being an essential part of our civilization is true, but again, you can make fire, I can make fire, neither of us are benders. So while that is useful, it's not enough to put it above any other element. For example, even without fire, if I have shelter, I can use airbending to keep myself warm by manipulating the air quality around me. After maybe 30 minutes, my body heat is going to heat that air up, and as long as I control the exchange with the air outside, I'll be fine. Or better yet, I could create an air scooter and scoot on out of there to a more hospitable area. And I know that people seem to think that just firebenders can fly. That's just not really a thing that we see outside of one person. And that's not the same as bloodbending being a rare element or extracting water from non-aqueous sources like plants or the air itself, because I'm 100% sure that if firebending flight was something that anyone could just do, we would actually see it more. Again, the reason we don't see these waterbending abilities in use is because there's no actual need for them in most places, whereas the Fire Nation had to invent balloons to achieve flight. Do you see what I'm getting at here? And again, remember, as I said before, if earthbending as the most powerful element gets a 10, firebending gets a 9.5. I'm not saying that firebending is utter garbage and you should never pick it. If you want to pick firebending, any bender is going to have a better time surviving during harsh winters than a non-bender is. That's just a fact, because you are a superhuman individual with the ability to control one of the four elements. But I just don't think the ability to make fire is that special from a survivability standpoint, because we can already do that. And just like the whole thing about never finding yourself in the middle of the ocean unless you choose to be there, unless you're a waterbender, nobody's gonna find themselves in some extremely cold place where you can't make fire. In real life, we have people who live in these frozen places and make fire. But in the Avatar universe, there's an entire civilization in the North Pole, a place where in real life, people do not live and never have because it's entirely inhospitable. Fire is just the least explored, Firebending is the most raw form of energy bending, so it should be vastly more powerful. So I've heard a lot that firebending is the least explored. It's definitely the most misunderstood and misused element, but to say it's the least explored is not true. We get a lot of lore and such on firebending throughout the show, and even with that, there's nothing that we learn that makes us go, this is groundbreaking for firebending, outside of not having to use anger and hate as the source of your firebending, which we already knew. Zuko had to learn that. We already knew that through Iroh. And saying that firebending is the most raw form of energy bending, so it should be vastly more powerful, doesn't make any sense because it's not plasma bending. If I remember correctly, one of these comments brings up plasma bending. It's not plasma bending. They don't have plasma bending, and the other three elements have pretty much the exact same level of attack potency as firebending does. If Matthew Patel can use his pyrokinesis to create plasma shields, then I don't see why firebenders can't do the same thing. I had to look up who Matthew Patel is, and this is a character from an entirely different show. I'm not sure if this is a joke. I have a hard time telling when people are joking, especially when it's in text. So I'm not sure if this is serious, but comparing firebenders to a character from a different show in order to say that firebending isn't the weakest element is irrelevant. And I just noticed that this person's username is Matthew Patel's Moonflower. So we have a stan in the chat. Sozin's Comet just boosts power, not technique. So under normal circumstances, Zhang and Ozai should definitely be able to still fly with fire. Also, Azula did it too. Azula does not fly. The next comment also says, tell that to Azula or Zhang or Iroh. Azula does not fly. This is a common misconception. This is a rocket jump. This is flight. One is performed outside of Sozin's Comet. One is performed under Sozin's Comet. This is a fire jump. This is flight. This is a fire jump. This is flight. So we just forget the science of electromagnetism, huh? Firebending has nothing to do with electromagnetism. Lightning bending doesn't make you Magneto. There's nothing in any Avatar media that says otherwise. So this is, say it with me now, irrelevant. I see your point, but let's not forget that firebenders can extinguish fire as well. If they can extinguish fire, they should also be able to do something similar with electricity. You had me in the beginning, but then you started talking about being able to do the same thing with electricity. Firebenders being able to extinguish fire as well is a good point, because one of the original points I made was if you drop a firebender into the middle of the woods and they have to fend for themselves, it's going to be harder for them to hunt wildlife than the other elements because, you know, fire starts wildfires and stuff like that. So if I'm trying to hunt something, I miss my fireball a couple times, now I'm in the middle of a forest fire, and that's a whole different thing to deal with. But the fact that firebenders can extinguish their own fire, as well as, you know, just other fire in general, is a good point. It's actually a great point. But then he goes on to say that the human brain runs off of electricity and firebenders should be able to extinguish electricity. That's just straight up headcanon. We never see anything like that in the show. He says, I think the upper potential of the other elements is explored, but firebenders are relatively unrefined because they can simply outmuscle most opponents. So like, as I said a couple minutes ago, firebending isn't an unexplored element as people think. It's just that most of the people in the show just want to burn shit, right? And even then, unless we're talking about like some spiritual ability, there's no way, there's no precedent for like fire healing or controlling the electricity within someone's mind. When it comes to having an abundance of said element to manipulate, lightning benders don't, like, overanalyzing Avatar said it best, where lightning bending is barely bending. It's more of just like lightning projection. So let's say there's a Tesla coil in front of me emitting electricity. I don't think a firebender would be able to do anything with that lightning beyond redirecting any bolts that would come their way, at least based on at least based on what we see in the actual canon of the show. Things like electromagnetic conduction, electric biostimulation, causing explosions inside someone's body, and possibly manipulation of other forms of energy along the electromagnetic spectrum should be available. No, they shouldn't. That's headcanon. And then at the end of the video he was responding to, I said, who do you think wins in a fight, Ozai or Toph? I personally think that Toph stands a good chance against Ozai outside of Sozin's Comet, mainly because Ozai is entirely featless, and Aang defeats Ozai, right? And then he goes to walk away, and Ozai had more than enough of a chance to kill him while his back was turned. And because of seismic sense, Aang was able to react. And Toph's seismic sense is better than Aang's, and so is her earthbending. So outside of Sozin's Comet, I think the entire fight would go just like that. So he says he thinks Ozai still beats Toph after he figures out how she sees. But even if he knows how she sees, Ozai can't fly outside of Sozin's Comet. Ozai has 1 feet outside of Sozin's Comet. Touch that fire. It ain't that strong. Yeah, fire hot. Cool, good point, bro. Fire is the only one that directly alters the elements it comes into contact with. Extreme heat will alter not just the temperature, but the state of the other elements like metal, water, and even disrupt air currents. And the subtypes do be more numerous than subtypes for other elements. Fire is just being underestimated entirely. This is just entirely untrue. Waterbenders are capable of manipulating all 3 states of matter for their element. When we talk about metal and lava bending, it's the same thing. I'm manipulating the different types of my element, and to a certain extent, I can manipulate its state of matter. Earth is never going to be a gas. Like, if I have a lump of iron in front of me, I'm never going to be able to turn it into a gas. The most I can do is create a plasma, which again is something we just never see in the show. So this is entirely false. And then he says that the subtypes for firebending are more numerous for that of the other elements. The only element that firebending has more subtypes than is airbending. Earthbending has the exact same amount of subtypes as firebending does. They both have 2. Waterbenders can bend ice, they can heal, they can bend steam, they can bend plants, and they can bend your blood. So yeah, like, making these videos causes me to wonder if we were all watching the same show. I think they make it weak in the series because they don't want to show the violence it can concur. That's not English, but you know, that's not a bad point. It is a kids show, so obviously when someone gets hit in the head with a rock from an earthbender, their skull doesn't explode. Instead, the rock shatters. And you know, from a power scaling standpoint, you would say, oh yeah, people in Avatar: The Last Airbender have a degree of enhanced durability, when in reality, you know, it's because the show had to make it past Nickelodeon censors, right? And the same goes for firebending. I don't think that disproves anything that I've said, mainly because we do see characters with burns on their skin. We do also see characters die, so, you know, of course it's not going to be egregious. We're not watching Invincible here, but they do a very good job showing the destructive capability of firebending without having gore in the show. If it wasn't a cartoon, fire would be OP. Imagine each fire attack actually burning people, like Katara's hand and Zuko's face, and both of those were not from very strong fire attacks. Very true. But like I said before, the show still does a very good job at illustrating the destructive capability of firebending, and I think more gore wouldn't do anything to convince me that firebending is any less than the burn people, blow stuff up, and shock people with lightning element. Fire is the most disadvantaged, not necessarily the weakest or worst. Airbending is definitely the most disadvantaged out of the 4, given that there's only one of them that we see for the entirety of the original series. Their culture keeps them from doing a lot of the same stuff that firebending can do. Like, a lot of the stuff we see out of airbending is a variation of arrow telekinesis, cyclone and tornado creation, and more mobility centric stuff. But to say firebending is more disadvantaged than the element that had pretty much every one of its characters killed off screen before the show even starts is a little misguided. They're the villains, of course they're gonna lose. Yeah, bro. Great point. Using the example of lightning, those are story points in a fantasy world. If I were to shoot lightning in any scenario, you wouldn't be able to dodge it at all, and you wouldn't be able to use any of the techniques you mentioned. As you said yourself, lightning strikes faster than you can think, so by the time you come up with a plan to fight, you're literally cooked. Yes, we're talking about a cartoon, so literally everything that happens in the show is part of the plot. That's why I didn't even respond really to the one that said, yeah, they're the bad guys. They're always going to lose because they're the bad guys. Yeah, totally. But that doesn't change the fact that we literally see Zuko jumping to the side relative to the speed that the lightning bolt that was already fired had been fired. From a power scaling standpoint, that just means that the people in Avatar: The Last Airbender can react to the lightning. As I said before, having access to lightning redirection doesn't make you any faster. It just means that you know how to bend lightning through your body in a way that's not going to kill you. Don't really agree if we're being honest. Firebending is the most unexplored, and it seems like you've left out some stuff from the comics as well. And also due to plot, since firebenders are evil, so fire is bad, they never got boost in power-ups, let's be real. Firebenders get boosts every time the sun is up, just like waterbenders get boosts at night. That's just not something that's really delved into, for one. And they also do get the biggest power-up in the Avatar world, which is Sozin's Comet. Yeah, it happens only once every 100 years, but to say that they don't get boosts and power-ups just isn't true. The entirety of the first show centers around this big fat boost that every firebender is going to get and how everyone else on the planet is going to work around it, right? Firebending being one of the most unexplored, we already covered that. It's just not really true. I left out a lot of stuff from the comics, yeah, because there's nothing in the comics that disproves anything that I've said, like at all. And this next one is actually from the same guy because there was a bit of a conversation in the comments. He goes, I'm not sure if you watched the show, but we learned all types of subbending from sand to swamp blood metal shit. Interesting. Toph even bending the meteorite, turning it into fluid state makes little sense. Earth seismic sense, air detection, mainly in Legend of Korra. Earth immortality, sonic screams, lava bending, etc. They showed a version of fire healing in Legend of Korra, and combustion and lightning, so why not explore the limits like plasma bending, heat detection, thermal vision? Why couldn't they drain the heat from someone's body or overheat it? There was no exploration into the depths of firebending. So, despite the utter lack of punctuation and grammar in this response, he's basically responding to someone else saying that, yeah, like, we spent the entire show learning about firebending and stuff and watching firebenders do their thing. So to say that firebending is the most unexplored makes no sense, which I agree with, as I've said multiple times throughout this video. And he does his best to list all the other things that we've seen the other elements do. But when we're talking about like thermal vision that has nothing to do with bending, he's talking about draining the heat from someone's body or overheating it. We definitely see firebenders overheat people's bodies by, shooting fire at them. What he's getting at is that the firebenders should have access to heat manipulation, which none of the four elements actually are. Like, eventually I have a I have a series called Every Single Superpower Ranked and Explained, and eventually I'm going to get into fire manipulation, water manipulation. Water bending is a limited form of water manipulation. Fire bending is a extremely limited form of fire manipulation. When I say fire bending is the weakest element, that has nothing to do with fire manipulation, right? Because fire manipulation would give you access to things like thermal vision, heat manipulation. To a certain extent, you might have plasma manipulation, temperature manipulation, right? So if I have fire manipulation, I might also have access to a limited degree of cold manipulation through the reverse of heat manipulation, if that makes any sense. But he's trying to apply this to bending, which just isn't a thing that Avatar does. As you can see, there's been a lot of electromagnetism, heat vision, bioelectric manipulation, like things that just don't exist in the Avatar universe and people are just bringing up because they wanted to comment, which I appreciate, but it makes no sense. And finally, we have the comments that were too long and covered too much stuff to fit into any of these other categories. As I said before, a lot of these comments bleed into multiple categories, but these next 2 comments are actually like multiple paragraphs. So yeah, here we go. Okay. Firebending is the most combat oriented. To enlighten you, General Iroh uses firebending to fly in Korra Season 1. Mako uses lightning to kill Ming-Hua in Season 3, so a perfect counter for water. I'd even say combustion bending counters blood bending because you do not need your body to bend. I'd also counter seismic sense with burning the ground. And if the Fire Nation was so weak, why did none of the Southern Water Tribes people attack the Fire Nation directly after their village was attacked? Or the Northern one or the Earth Nation? Fire is the strongest offensively. I'm sorry guys, like it's so hard to read these comments because like there's just no grammar at all. Fire is the strongest offensively, but they lack people that are good at bending. The lightning bending is used as a utility and not a combative, mostly unlike metal bending that is shown to be used by the defense force. Also, I don't think waterbenders purify their water. Katara's bending water from Season 2 still tasted like swamp water, indicating she did remove the H2O from whatever was fixed to it. And it's less they can control an element, more they somewhat control the state of matter, because Katara moves lots of liquids also. What are airbenders bending? If it's the oxygen, then they should be able to control water too. Fire is nerfed because they had... So this comment is bullshit. So where to start, man? So I did, when I first made that video, I did totally forget that General Iroh uses firebending to fly at the end of Korra Season 1 because it happens one time, we never see it again, doesn't get any fanfare. Like when Azula does her rocket jump, she does it multiple times, and it's like these big blasts of fire, and it's like this big thing like, oh, Azula's gonna fall to her death. Oh no, she does a rocket jump to be able to touch the wall. Okay, we're gonna escape. Oh no, Azula does this rocket jump in order to catch up to the gondola, in which case she doesn't even rocket jump all the way there. She rocket jumps up to the wire, clips on, and then uses the fire to like skid down the wire to get to the gondola, right? Versus with General Iroh, yeah, it's straight up flight. Like if you go watch the clip, I'll put the clip on screen right now. He's flying, but there's zero fanfare. It just was so unimpressive, and I totally forgot it. So when this came out, when I made this video, I totally forgot that was a thing. So yes, he does fly. But saying combustion bending counters blood bending makes no sense because I have to engage my entire diaphragm to combustion bend. I have to be able to aim. Like we see Pali curving her shots, but combustion bending takes a degree of focus that you're probably not going to have when your body is being controlled from the inside. Like when you're being puppeteered via your blood vessels, you're not going to be combustion bending effectively. I'm sorry. Like he says that you don't need your body to bend, you don't need your arms and legs to bend, but you definitely need that diaphragm. He says seismic sense is countered by burning the ground. I really don't think it's that simple. If you have access to seismic sense, it really implies that you are a master, like an absolute master of earthbending, and like the ground being on fire. I'm assuming he's saying that to be like, okay, if the ground's on fire, your feet aren't going to be on the ground, so you won't be able to sense vibrations. That's kind of dumb, because it's like, okay, so I'm an earthbender with seismic sense in a fight with a firebender, and I sense them doing some type of firebending move to shoot fire at my feet. I can still counter that with just normal earthbending. I can make some type of earthbending barrier. I can create a pillar for myself to stand on. There's a million very simple ways why I could counter that. If the Fire Nation was so weak, why did the Southern Water Tribe, the Northern Water Tribe, or the Earth Kingdom not attack them? Because that's not the timing they were on. If the Northern Water Tribe wanted to wipe out the Fire Nation, they definitely could. And I think it would be very easy. With 50 waterbenders, they would probably be able to raise sea level and just entirely cut the Fire Nation off from the rest of the world. That's just not the timing they were on. Nobody was being aggressive except for the Fire Nation. And when it comes to the Fire Nation beating out the Southern Water Tribe, as I said before, the Southern Water Tribe has never been a military powerhouse, when the Fire Nation's whole thing is military technology. So it's kind of like hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby, and being like, oh, why did the coughing baby not attack if the coughing baby also has an AK-47? It's like the coughing baby doesn't know how to use the AK-47 because that's not the timing it's on. And that's probably a dumb analogy, but hopefully it makes at least a little bit of sense. Yeah, he says that lightning bending is used for utility, but metal bending isn't. Zaofu is entirely run by metal benders, and as I said before, I'm sure a majority of Republic City was constructed by metal benders and earth benders. Like, if you look at Ba Sing Se, the entire city is run by earth benders, versus a city, like, name a city in the Fire Nation, or why don't we just say Republic City, because this is when that actually applies. Republic City isn't like dominated by lightning benders. I'm pretty sure these people like would be able to come up with the turbine if there were no lightning benders, and they would still have access to electricity. And then he brings up the point where Sokka, I can't remember if it's like when they're stuck in the desert or when this happened, but I remember what he's talking about. He's talking about when Sokka drinks from Katara's bending water and says that like waterbenders lack the precision to separate toxins from the water because the water tasted like the foggy swamp. And it's like, that's her bending water that she uses to hurt people with. I don't think she's worried about making sure it's the purest water on the planet. She literally has spiritual healing powers. I feel like if she used that on just like a body of water, she'd like water that doesn't have gunk and like pollutants in it, right? I'm thinking about the Painted Lady. Obviously she wasn't like running around purifying the water in that sense, but let's say she had her bending water, I'm sure she would be able to make it more drinkable if she wanted to. She just didn't want to. That's the water she uses to kill people. Kill, quote unquote. She doesn't kill, but you know, it's the water she uses to fight people. It's not supposed to taste good. He says that if airbenders are able to specifically manipulate oxygen, that they should also be able to manipulate water. Well, airbenders aren't capable of specifically manipulating like individual gases as far as I know, so that's pretty irrelevant. Yeah, and then he goes on to say, fire is nerfed because they the bad guys, you idiot. These people are floundering to defend firebending as if I like called their mom some bad name, and it just makes no sense to me. And I'm honestly dreading reading this next one because it's going to be more of the same stuff. And it says he went back and edited this, so if there's not good punctuation and grammar in this one, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm not exactly too sure despite the explanation, but with enough heat you can almost immediately evaporate water molecules. That's true. I gotta let you know also though that a master waterbender can manipulate steam and just turn the steam back into water. Yeah, I don't think that's a thing that like we really see, but we see enough to know that that's a thing that could happen. Also, like, sure, you can sublimate ice and like evaporate water, but okay. I can also put out your fire with my water, so like our elements cancel out. I don't think that means that firebending is above waterbending. With enough heat you can melt through steel or a good amount of materials of rock, or use a powerful enough combustion to penetrate it. This is true. With enough heat you can most likely counter massive air waves by redirecting it towards the opposer, since fire is reliant on oxygen and can just easily be pushed back with an experienced bender, making an airbender's strength his/her greatest weakness. It's actually the other way around. Airbending directly counters firebending. We don't see any firebenders creating firestorms, which is like a fire that's so hot that it's creating air currents and like sucking the oxygen in and stuff like that. We don't see that. If anything, if you shoot a fire blast at me and I respond with an air blast, you said it yourself, the fire relies on like air and oxygen to be. So it's gonna blow back in your face as the firebender, not mine as the airbender. That doesn't make any sense. Suffocating helplessly in an immersive heat wave. Yeah, no firestorms. And you add blue fire on top of that, it's GG. So the blue fire is purely symbolic of Azula's mind state and like her prodigy, the fact that she's a prodigy. This is based on artist statements. I don't know where people are getting like blue fire being hotter than the normal fire. That's not a thing in normal physics, and it's not a thing in the show. To say that fire can't override the higher tiers of practical strength towards the other elements is a bit ludicrous if you have high IQ in... Yeah, okay, so to say that fire can't counter the other elements at higher tiers is ludicrous. So at higher tiers, they all like cancel out. Every element counters the other ones at higher tiers. I hate to break it to you, but like, yeah. If you have a high IQ in mechanical engineering, what's to say lightning bending can't provide the optimal use for such things? Or how about starting or restarting a city power grid with enough effort, because there's no type of bending style of any subtype that's going to provide anything close to what people in modern day most heavily rely on, which is electricity. Yeah, so yeah, we have electricity without bending, so that whole point is kind of moot to me. If the only like upper tier use for your electricity is restarting the power grid, you kind of just need to make a better power grid. Speaking of expendability, you can't revive or restart someone's heart via electrical pulsation like how doctors do today, which is a form of healing. I mean, we never see that. we never see that, A, and B, you wouldn't be able to do that with lightning. That's not how lightning works, or even like the electricity bending, which I haven't mentioned at all, that the lightning, quote unquote, that we see in Korra isn't the same thing as the lightning that we see in ATLA. Like the lightning in ATLA is a largely like spiritual thing, and it's very honed over one bloodline essentially having access to this ability, versus just any Joe Schmo can go, yeah, zap, you know, freaking I'm gonna go work in the factory and churn out this lightning for the next 6 hours. It's not the same. So, and the point is that neither of those techniques are the same thing as a defibrillator. Yeah, not to mention that lightning can travel very well through metal, providing an excellent conduction-based advantage over earthbenders when battling on metallic surfaces / environments. Yes, so like if we're gonna get into that, then the firebender shooting the lightning would also be susceptible to that, unless like for some reason I'm standing on a metal floor and you're not. Most shoes also have rubber soles. Like there's a lot of issues with that. It seems that there's too much oversight in regards to what this style is truly capable of. Not to mention that lightning can travel very well through. Oh, I guess I skipped that. So he's saying basically that I'm leaving stuff out, and it's like, I'm not leaving these things out, guys. They just don't matter. And that's why I'm making this video. This is, hopefully I can put the whole firebending debate to bed for a little bit and talk about the other elements, because I really do like talking about Avatar. I would love to talk about something else. So yeah, you know, in the future, after I get, you know, this season of every single superpower ranked and explained done, and I do some content about the other aspects of Avatar, maybe I'll circle back to this. But yeah, I didn't leave any of that stuff out to like, oh, I'm gonna leave out these things that make my argument look less than it is. I left them out because they don't matter. You know, I could potentially irradiate electricity from my own body to said metallic surfaces, electrocuting anyone within a radius of assailability depending on the user's degree of mastery of the bending style. Yeah, so like, sure, quote unquote, depending on the degree of mastery, that's also just something we don't see. We don't see lightning aura, none of that. We don't see any of that. Creating a near omnidirectional trap with nowhere to go unless you use elevation maneuvers to counter like air or earthbenders do. Yeah. So like, no. And I will say, if that was the case, elevation, levitation wouldn't counter because lightning travels through the air as well. So with enough voltage, they can paralyze you long enough, paralyze in all caps for some reason, you long enough to easily deliver the finishing blow with ingenious tactics, since anyone, including your own grandma, can dodge lightning, which is complete bullshit, by the way. So, okay, so ingenious tactics, we're assuming that whatever firebender is fighting here is a genius. Yeah, it's totally true that if I get struck by lightning, I'm gonna be paralyzed and then you can kill me. But as I said before, everyone in Avatar can react to lightning. We've seen this. People want to like watch the show and watch Zuko straight up jump in front of lightning, or watch Iroh catch lightning out of the sky and say, oh, it's because they can redirect lightning. That's not making you any faster. I've said that multiple times. I don't need to dwell on it. Fire, in terms of functionality, operates similarly to air/oxygen, since it really has no true form, just under the manipulative will of air itself, which is quite telling, since basing it completely from, in fact, I'm just enlightening. What? Okay. I think I skipped forward, which is quite telling, since firebenders can create omnidirectional waves of fire scientifically. This dude is just yapping, bro. And FYI, this isn't to say that in canon to the actual lore is where I'm basing it completely from. Yeah, obviously. In fact, I'm just enlightening the fact that in terms of firebending's true potential, along with the other intangibilities, like, dude is just using big words that, like, I totally understand, but they have you shouldn't be using these words in this context. The other intangibilities, like situational and tactical intelligence, which shouldn't be disregarded or refuted, mind you. So they should be disregarded and refuted because it's headcanon. Like you literally just said, you're not basing this off of the canon and the actual lore of the show. Like, you're talking about firebending's quote unquote true potential. You're talking about fire manipulation, my guy. Right? And you're picking and choosing things from, like, you know, what you would do with firebending, when it's like, that's not what we see in the show, man. They put limitations on these things on purpose. It's one of the most dangerous elements out there when used properly and optimally. The way certain mediocre benders have been using it in the last two shows are irrelevant to me. Yeah, so yeah, there you go. The way they use it in the show is irrelevant. He thinks it has a true potential that we don't see, and that means it's not the weakest. There you go. Straight up headcanon. Yeah, man. I think people, like, for example, this latest short that I posted was literally me listing the top 3 firebending feats in the show, because I was like, hey man, like, people seem to think I think firebending is weak. I do think it's the bottom of the 4, but I don't think it's like a terrible power to have. And people heard me say, I think firebending is the weakest element, and immediately ran to the comments to go and like complain. And it's like, dude, at least watch the video. Like, in the video, I literally said they're all neck and neck at the end of the day. So here's some firebending feats to make you guys feel better about me thinking your favorite element is the weakest one of the 4. You know, based on the lore of the show, there is no weakest one. But this whole conversation came about because it was a topic that was floating around the internet that I thought I would weigh in on. All right, so yeah. If I freaking pissed you off in any way, or you know, you have some rebuttal, let me know, and then I'll make it into a short. Let me know, and I'll respond in a short. But this is the last long form video I'm gonna do on this topic for a while, because I have other stuff that I need to do. This has been Simeon Zoom. This is why firebending is the weakest element, part 2. Y'all have a good day. I'll see you in the next one.